is Baroness Ingegard Castanrazi, and you are listening to Inge Reads Sections 6.1 and 6.2 of the SCA Fencing Marshal's Handbook, April 2020 edition, and this begins on page 9 of this handbook. Again, as always, as revisions are made to the handbook, I will re-record those sections and update it to the playlist as soon as possible. Please use this as an accompaniment to and not a replacement to the handbook or any of your local or kingdom rules or laws regarding fighting or fencing. Please always check with your local marshal for more information about that. So we are going to begin with section 6. Again, we're going to cover 6.1 and 6.2. And 6 begins with description of weapons and defensive objects. 6.1 Weapons. 6.1.1 There are 5 standard types of weapons in SCA fencing. 6.1.1.1 Dagger. 6.1.1.2 Single sword. 6.1.1.3 Two-handed sword. 6.1.1.4 Spear. 6.1.1.5 Projectile weapons. 6.2 Metal bladed weapons. 6.2.1 This section refers to metal weapons, which are used in all categories of SCA fencing. Bladed weapons are daggers, single-handed swords, and two-handed swords. 6.2.2 Bladed weapons can be used for thrusts, cuts, and percussive blows as allowed by the category of combat. Other weapons are thrust only. 6.2.3 The blade of metal-bladed weapons must be made of steel and must be produced by a commercial entity and crafted for the purpose of competitive sword fighting. 6.2.3.1 Hilts, handles, pommels, and other parts of a weapon not meant to strike the opponent can be made of metal, wood, leather, or other reasonable facsimile. 6.2.4 Bladed weapons will not have more than one blade. 6.2.5 Weapons are to be maintained in good order, with no loose pieces and no burrs on metal or wooden edges that can snag the opponent's body or clothing. 6.2.6 Any blade with kinks or cracks shall not be used. Steel blades that develop these defects cannot be repaired and must be retired. Sharp bends that can be recurved and not redeveloped for at least a day's use may be used. Light rapier blades or flexi daggers with S-curves shall not be used unless they can be recurved safely in such a way that it maintains a single non-S curve for at least a day's use. 6.2.7 Handles are to be substantially straight and substantially in line with the main axis of the blade. 6.2.8 Open guards, swept hilts, and multiple forward swept quillians, or any component with an opening larger than 3/8 of an inch, or 10 millimeters, and smaller than 1 inch, or 2.5 centimeters, are not permitted for use with light rapier. Knuckle bows are deemed safe for use with light rapier blades. 6.2.9. The ends of quillians must be blunt. 6.2.10. Blades are to have a tip that includes the following components. 6.2.10.1. The end of the metal must be blunt, with no sharp edges or corners. 6.2.10.2. A cover of rubber, shatter-resistant polymer, or leather with a minimum size in any direction that strikes the opponent of 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters. 6.2.10.2.1. Rubber and polymer tips must have a minimum of 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters between the striking surface and the tip or edge of the sword. 6.2.10.2.2. Leather must be a minimum of 1.6 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch, 4-ounce thickness. 6.2.10.3. Tape or equivalent and a contrasting color to the tip and blade that extends both onto the tip and onto the blade. See the footnote 1 at the beginning regarding this, and I will read that in a moment. For tips built in a period style, a period alternate to tape may be used, so long as it provides a contrasting color to the blade and the tip, and the combination is secured on the sword so that it will not fly off under reasonable fighting conditions. Now there's a footnote at the bottom of page 10. It is footnote 1, and it refers to 6.2.10.3, which we just read, but it's at the end of the first sentence, which reads, tape or equivalent in contrasting color to the tip and blade that extends both onto the tip and onto the blade. So here begins the footnote, footnote 1. The tip should fit snugly onto the sword end, if necessary, wrapping the blade at the point where the tip ends to create a shoulder for the tip to set on, without wobbling is encouraged. Although the tape will aid in holding the tip on the blade, its primary function is a visual cue of where the tip is. If the tip flies off during combat, the tape helps marshals and combatants notice it and the absence of a tip, with some tape left on the sword, is similarly helpful. And that ends footnote 1 at the bottom of page 10. I will now continue with 6.2.10.4. Tape must not cover the front surface of the tip. 6.2.10.5. Tape should be somewhat resistant to impact with metal, and its adhesive shall have appropriate adherence to rubber and metal. Duct tape, electrical tape, and colored strapping tape are examples of good tapes for this application. Painter's tape, masking tape, and other paper-based tapes are not. 6.2.11. Tips are to be replaced if the tip shows evidence of punch-through, cracking, or bulging, or in the case of polymer tips, discoloration. 6.2.12. Steel blades will not be altered by grinding, cutting, heating, hammering, or other actions that could significantly alter their temper, flexibility, or durability. Normal combat stresses and the blade care do not violate this rule. Exceptions are under the following. 6.2.12.1. The tang of the weapon may be altered. 6.2.12.2 Rapier and cut and thrust combat blades may be shortened so long as they maintain acceptable flexibility. 6.2.12.3 A nut or other blunt metal object designed to spread impact may be welded to the tip of rapier and cut and thrust blades, so long as care is taken to prevent damage to the temper of the blade. 6.2.12.4 The end of a blade may be filed so as to blunt the tip. 6.2.13 The length of the blade and grip define the type of weapon. Blade length is to be measured from the base of the blade, i.e., the front face of the guard, or the front end of the Quillians fore open guard, to the end of the tip. Grip length makes the remainder of the overall sword length. Curved blade length is measured as a straight line from the tip to the base of the blade. Now, at the end of this part, it says to reference footnote 2. So in reference to 6.213, I'm going to now read footnote 2, which is at the bottom of page 11. And you will see footnote 2 here. The measurement is done in a straight line rather than along the curve because it is specified according to the reach of the weapon. Highly curved blades that skirt the spirit of this law pose issues with an exceedingly long aspect ratio and can be kept from use at a marshal's discretion. 6.213.1 Blades are to have at most one substantial curve. See footnote 3. I will read that at the end of this rule. Blades that are so curved that the tip does not contact the ground when the grip is perpendicular to the ground, i.e. pointed vertically, are not allowed in SCA fencing. Now it also references footnote 4, which is at the bottom of page 12, in addition to footnote 3 at the bottom of page 11 for this rule. So I will read both of those footnotes. And it also asks you to see figure 1. So if you take a look at figure 1 on your screen, you can see that this sword, the tip, when extended towards the ground, will touch. However, this one, the curve of the blade, the tip is not contacting the ground. Rather, it is flexing. And underneath figure 1, it reads, with the handle vertical, the tip must touch the ground. In this example, the sword on the left is allowed. The sword on the right is not. Now again, I'm going to read footnote 3, and that's in regards to blades are to have at most one substantial curve from 6.213.1. So the footnote on the bottom of page 11 for footnote 3 reads as follows. Weapons with multiple small waves about a singular axis, such as a flamberge weapons, are considered per their main axis, i.e., each wave is not necessarily a substantial curve. Now, it does refer also to footnote 4 when it talks about the tip contacting the ground. Again, that relates to figure 1, but I will read that footnote as well. I know it's kind of spread out. Just bear with me. Footnote 4 reads as follows. Although the examples of blades with extreme curves for which this is not the case can be found in period, the use of these swords requires a highly different mechanic than those of the combat intended by these rules, and so are not allowed as weapons in SCA combat, although non-metal versions may be used as a defensive object. So again, that references figure 1, and it discusses blades that might be historical, that have extreme curves, but again, regarding the sport, please talk to your local marshal. So I will now move back on to 6.214, which is the next rule, no weapon shall be longer than the total weapon length specified in Table 2 and in reference to Figure 2. So we will take a look at those tables in just a moment. I will read the next rule before we move on to them. So we will read 6.214.1 before we look at those tables. Exceptions to the blade lengths and grip lengths are allowed on a case-by-case basis by the Kingdom Fencing Marshal. For example, a weapon with a grip of 11 inches may be allowed, but if the total length is greater than 28 inches and no greater than 60 inches, then that weapon is deemed a sword. So this table, which is Table 2, and right below it is Figure 2, parts of a weapon and measurement of the blade and grip. And the table subheading says, or subtext says, Table 2, the lengths allowed for the overall weapon, represented by W, blade length, represented by B, and grip, represented by G. And then there's an asterisk. Note that two-handed sword blade plus grip combination must not exceed the maximum sword length of 60 inches or 152 centimeters overall. So these are formulas that are used to calculate mins and maxes for weapons and how they're classified. So along the top column, if you can see it, it says weapon length, which is represented by W. It's equal to the formula of B plus G, basically blade length plus the grip length for total weapon length. And then your blade length is represented by B, and your grip length is represented by G. So the very first weapon it lists is Dagger, and the total weapon length must be less than or equal to 28 inches or 71 centimeters. So a dagger cannot be longer than 28 inches or 71 centimeters on this table. And then your blade length for a dagger is less than or equal to 18 inches or 45 centimeters. That means it cannot be longer than 18 inches or 45 centimeters, but it can be shorter. And your grip length can not be greater than 10 inches or 25 centimeters. It can be equal to it, however. So less than or equal to 10 inches or less than or equal to 25 centimeters for your grip length. And again, the total weapon length is 28 inches or 71 centimeters for a dagger. Now I'm going to move on to single sword. Now, single sword has some ranges in it. When I get into it, please don't get confused. I know it might sound confusing to hear it, but it's more of the range of what's allowed. Now, total weapon length for single sword here is listed as weapon length must be less than or equal to 58 inches or 147 centimeters. Now, the blade length, it has here, blade length must be longer than 18 inches or 45 centimeters, but it also must be less than or equal to 48 inches and 122 centimeters. So more plainly speaking, your blade length should be for a single sword between 18 to 48 inches or 45 centimeters to 122 centimeters. Your grip length for single sword must be less than or equal to 10 inches or 25 centimeters. It cannot be more unless as specified below. If you talk to your marshal, as noted in the rules, but that is not up to me, that is up to your marshal. And then we will get to two-handed sword. So your total weapon length must be equal to or less than 60 inches or 152 centimeters. And that's where the max is with that asterisk down below. That's the overall total length. So the blade and grip combination must not exceed the maximum sword length. And the blade length for a two-handed sword, it must be longer than 30 inches or longer than 76 centimeters, but less than 48 inches or 122 centimeters. So again, your range is 30 to 48 inches, or 76 to 122 centimeters for just the blade length. Your grip length must fall in the range between 10 inches and 24 inches, or 25 centimeters to 60 centimeters. Again, it must be greater than 10, less than 24, or 25 centimeters to 60 centimeters. So hopefully that was clear enough for you to understand. And to look below at Figure 2, you will see the parts of the weapon. They show a variety of weapons and a variety of different style grips and shapes of blades. But in general, it gives you the idea of where the Marshal will look to measure your grip, as opposed to the points that they'll use to measure in a straight line your blade. And of course, on the left, it shows not just the guard and the blade, but that weapon. It shows the pommel, handle, quillians, which are included inside the area of the grip. And of course, the pommel is included in that measurement. It looks like the grip may or may not be the center of the pommel. I am not sure. That is where you will have to talk to a marshal. Please talk to a marshal, because that is where you're going to get your answers. All right. So we've already gone over footnote number 4. We are now going to move to page 13, 6.2.15. Blades for light rapier and rapier combat are to meet or exceed the greater flexibility requirement, and those for cut and thrust combat are to meet or exceed the lesser flexibility requirement in the table below. Blades are tested by being held rigidly horizontally, and a 6-ounce or 170-gram weight is placed at the tip. Any flexure due to the blade's weight itself is not counted in the flexibility standard. The blades must meet this standard in each of 2 directions, i.e., testing the flexibility of the blade along its flatter dimension, then turning the sword over 180 degrees and test it again. Epées are to be tested in both V up and V down configurations. And we are here at Table 3. And for Table 3, it shows the ranges of the greater flexibility requirements for various weapons for both light and rapier combat. So light rapier and rapier combat. And then it shows the lesser flexibility requirement for cut and thrust combat. So I'm going to read down the parameters for each weapon by fencing category so that you know which it falls into, rather than by weapon. So you can consider it by the fencing category rather than by the weapon. So under light rapier and rapier combat, the greater flexibility requirement for these fencing categories is as such. Dagger, 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters. Single sword, 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Two-handed sword, 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Metal spear, 1 inch or 25 millimeters. And again, those are the greater flexibility requirements, which are for light rapier and rapier combat. Now I will read the requirements for lesser flexibility requirement, which is for cut and thrust combat. So under cut and thrust combat, dagger, 1/2 inch or 12 millimeter as a measurement. Single sword, 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters. Two-handed sword, 1/2 inch or 12 millimeters. And metal spear, 1 inch or 25 millimeters. So again, those are the lesser flexibility requirements for cut and thrust combat for those weapons. Again, please refer to Table 3 for those measurements on page 13 of the April 2020 guide. And underneath Table 3, it says flexibility requirements for metal-bladed weapons when a 6-ounce or 170-gram weight is placed on the tip and the blade is held horizontally. All right. 6.3 spears will begin our next recording session, so I'm going to end it here. Again, if you have any comments regarding the rules or any of these measurements or requirements or parameters, please talk to your local marshal and talk to your kingdom marshal. And again, reference your most current handbook. This is meant to just be a complement to your studies of fencing and rapier and cut and thrust activities. So, as always, I hope you have a great day.